After my husband died, his mother tried taking my home. She never expected what happened next.
I never thought a funeral could feel like the beginning of a nightmare. My husband had just been laid to rest, and the house we had shared felt hollow, like someone had emptied it of warmth, leaving only echoes of laughter that would never return. I was exhausted, emotionally raw, and trying to cling to the small comforts of routine. Our dishes, our garden, the way sunlight used to fall on the living room floor in the mornings. But even in that fragile quiet, something shifted, and I could feel it before I even saw her. My mother-in-law arrived that afternoon. I hadn't expected her so soon, and when she walked through the door, it wasn't with the usual hesitant, sorrowful demeanor. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and cold in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. She looked around the rooms filled with the life my husband and I had built together, and then she turned to me and said the words I would never forget. "The house is mine now." At first, I thought I had misheard her. My grief clouded my mind, made me doubt my own ears. Maybe she was speaking out of shock, out of pain. I hoped so. But then she repeated it, her voice firm, like a declaration rather than a question. My body froze, my heart raced, and I couldn't find words. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me alone with the impossible. I tried to reason with her. I reminded her of our life together, of all the memories we had built. I tried to appeal to her sense of family, to the love I thought she had for my husband. But it was like speaking to a wall. There was no hesitation, no trace of doubt, only a calculated certainty in her claim. The realization hit me like a hammer. She had no intention of seeing this as a shared loss. For her, my husband's death was an opportunity. The first week was a blur. She came and went without warning, each visit heavier than the last. Letters started arriving in the mail. Legal notices, demands, even threats. My once safe home had transformed into a battleground, and every corner, every familiar object, seemed tainted with tension. I could feel it pressing in, whispering at the edges of my mind, making me doubt myself and my ability to protect what we had built. Even neighbors noticed the change. Whispers floated through the air when she came to visit, small comments from people who had once been indifferent. I felt eyes on me when I walked through the street, their curiosity sharp and invasive. My friends tried to comfort me, but even their voices felt distant. I was trapped inside a storm of manipulation and fear, and every attempt to speak or act seemed to push me deeper into despair. Then, the small intrusions began. Things moved just slightly out of place, keys that didn't belong to me, objects in rooms that I knew I had left untouched. My sense of security eroded day by day. Nights became a torture of restless pacing and listening for noises that could mean anything or nothing. Each creak of the floorboards felt deliberate, like someone was watching, waiting for me to falter. The house no longer belonged to me in spirit, even if I still had the keys in my hand. The turning point came when I realized this wasn't a simple claim. It was deliberate, planned, and calculated. I discovered letters she had sent weeks before my husband died, documents she had begun preparing long before I ever imagined she would make a move. It wasn't just greed. It was strategy, manipulation, and cruelty wrapped in politeness. I felt rage boiling beneath the surface, but I also felt fear. Raw, paralyzing fear, because I didn't know how far she would go. And then, strangers started appearing. People I didn't recognize, claiming to be experts or consultants, wandering through my home, asking questions I didn't have a data at. Nasvas too. They examined our furniture, our belongings, even our personal spaces, as if I were no longer allowed to be here. I felt like a ghost in the very place I had once called sanctuary, I began to wonder if this house, filled with years of love and life, would ever truly be mine again. But amid the chaos, I also discovered something unexpected, a spark of resilience. Fear was there, yes, but alongside it grew determination. I refused to let grief and despair dictate the remainder of my life. I started documenting everything, keeping careful records of each intrusion, each threat, each calculated word she spoke. I reached out to anyone who could help me, piecing together allies where I had previously felt isolated. Slowly, I began to realize that while I had lost my husband, I didn't have to lose myself too. One evening, weeks after the first terrifying confrontation, I returned home to find a note slipped under the door. It wasn't just a message, it was a warning. "You can't stop what's coming," it read, in elegant, precise handwriting that made the threat feel more personal than any shouting ever could. I clutched the paper, shaking, my chest tight, and for the first time, I truly understood the depth of the storm I had stepped into. This wasn't about a house, it was about control, power, and the way some people prey on grief to seize what they want. I sank to the floor and cried, not just for my husband, not just for the house, but for the helplessness that had settled over me like a shroud. And yet, even in that darkness, I made a silent promise to myself. I would fight. I would protect what was mine, and I would not allow fear to steal my life away. The days that followed became a tense dance of survival. Every interaction, every letter, every unexpected knock on the door became a test of my courage. I felt like I was living someone else's story, a tale of betrayal and calculated cruelty that no one should have to endure. And yet, I kept moving forward, step by step, documenting, observing, resisting. I didn't know what the end would look like. But, I knew I had to be ready. And in that readiness, in the small victories of noticing, recording, and resisting, I began to reclaim pieces of myself. But I also knew, deep down, that the worst was still coming. The next confrontation would not be like the first. It would demand everything from me, challenge me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, and force me to face the darkest corners of betrayal and injustice. Would I be strong enough to face it? Could I protect what I loved? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I could no longer remain passive. The battle for my home, my memory of my husband, and my very life had only just begun. The days after that note became unbearable. Every sound in the house made me jump. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even the wind brushing against the windows. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by fear, but unwilling to leave what my husband and I had built together. Each time my mother-in-law appeared, it was like a storm passing through, her calm exterior masking the storm of calculation underneath. I couldn't predict what she would do next, and that uncertainty gnawed at me more than her threats ever could. She began showing up with new helpers. People I didn't know, faces I didn't recognize, but all of them polite, precise, and unnervingly authoritative. They asked questions I couldn't answer, commented on things I had never thought were important, and treated our home as if I were no longer allowed to claim any ownership of it. I watched them move through our rooms, measuring, inspecting, filing away information I didn't know how to protect myself from. The helplessness I felt was suffocating, but somewhere beneath that fear, a slow, hard determination was building. I started keeping a journal, writing down every encounter, every threat, every subtle move she made. I photographed letters, kept records of visits, documented every strange intrusion. At first, it felt like a futile attempt to prove my sanity or protect myself. But soon, it became a lifeline. A way to remind myself that I still had control over something. If I could capture the truth, maybe I could fight back. But just as I began to feel a shred of hope, things escalated further. One evening, I returned home to find a door slightly ajar that I was certain I had locked. My heart raced as I entered, calling out, but no one answered. I noticed subtle signs. Furniture shifted, objects moved, and a strange odor lingered in the air. Someone had been inside, watching, waiting. Panic clawed at my chest, but I refused to run. I refused to leave. I needed to face this head-on, even if it terrified me. The next confrontation was the worst. My mother-in-law arrived in the afternoon, her usual calm replaced by a kind of cold intensity. She didn't speak at first. She simply walked through the rooms, her gaze assessing, her presence heavy. Then she spoke, but it wasn't words of comfort or grief. It was a calculated challenge. She reminded me, subtly but sharply, that she had rights, that the house was hers, and that she was prepared to take whatever steps necessary to claim it. I felt anger, fear, and disbelief swirl together in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, but I also understood the danger. She was relentless, methodical, and willing to exploit every weakness I had. I couldn't let her win, but I didn't know how to stop her. I started calling lawyers, friends, anyone who could help. I sought advice, but even with support, the sense of invasion never fully left. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face on my property, every whispered comment from neighbors added another layer to the tension that now consumed my life. I realized this wasn't just a personal battle. It was a fight against a system that allowed people like her to manipulate greed of power and legal loopholes to seize what wasn't theirs. Then came the first undeniable proof of her plan. A set of documents hidden in plain sight, revealing that she had orchestrated everything weeks before my husband's funeral. The sight of them made my hands shake and my chest tighten. I had thought her threats were just words, manipulations made in the heat of grief. But the truth was far more calculated. She had planned this. She had schemed while I mourned, waiting for the moment when I was most vulnerable. Fear was almost unbearable, but alongside it, a fierce determination began to rise. I refused to be a victim. I refused to let her steal not just our house, but the memory of my husband, the life we had shared, and the dignity I had left. I organized the evidence, compiled the documents, and prepared for the fight that I knew would define the coming weeks. Each small action I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, even as the tension in the house continued to grow. The weeks that followed were a constant struggle. Every day felt like navigating a minefield. I didn't know what she might do next, who she might send, or what new manipulations she would attempt. But each day, I reminded myself of why I had to continue. This wasn't just about a house. It was about justice, about courage, and about refusing to let grief make me powerless. I had lost someone I loved more than anything, but I refused to let that loss define the rest of my life. And then, one afternoon, I discovered the final piece of her scheme. It wasn't just legal documents or intrusions. It was something personal, something that revealed the true extent of her plan to manipulate and control everything I held dear. I remember feeling a mix of horror and disbelief, my heart racing so fast it felt like it would burst from my chest. I had never imagined betrayal could take this form, or that someone I had once trusted could go to such lengths. But in that moment, even as fear and shock threatened to overwhelm me, I realized something important. I wasn't helpless. I had evidence, I had allies, and most importantly, I had the strength to confront this injustice. The battle was far from over, but I knew I couldn't back down. I had to face her, uncover the truth, and reclaim my life. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot, and the tension in the house felt thicker than ever. But I felt a sense of readiness I hadn't known before, a readiness to fight back, to reclaim what was mine. and to show that even in the face of deliberate cruelty, resilience can survive. I didn't know what the next confrontation would look like, or how it would end, but I knew it would change everything. The fight for my home, my husband's memory, and my dignity had reached a turning point, and I had no choice but to see it through, no matter how terrifying or impossible it seemed. The days after discovering her plan were the hardest I had ever faced. I felt like a soldier in a war I hadn't signed up for, defending something that had always been mine. Every time I stepped into the living room, I half expected to find her there, waiting, her presence a silent accusation. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield, every corner a potential trap, every sound a signal that she or her allies were close. And then the subtle intimidation began to escalate into something more overt. One afternoon, I returned from a short walk to find the front gate slightly open. The latch wiggled as if someone had been inside. My stomach turned, my chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. I checked every room, every window, every closet. Nothing was missing, at least not yet, but the message was clear. She was testing me, letting me know that she could come and go as she pleased. I started noticing patterns. Her visits were no longer random. They followed schedules I could almost predict. People she sent would appear at the most inconvenient times, tending to be professionals or neighbors, their eyes scanning, calculating, measuring my every reaction. It was terrifying, but I began to anticipate it, to prepare. I barricaded certain rooms, moved valuable documents, kept cameras rolling on the few devices I could manage. Fear was my constant companion, but I refused to let it win. Then came the first real confrontation. My mother-in-law arrived on a Thursday, when I was least prepared. She didn't announce herself, didn't knock. She walked in, holding a stack of papers and a calm smile that made my blood run cold. She didn't even look at me directly at first. She simply spread the papers across the table, letting me see the legal documents that, if left unchecked, would have given her everything. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten loudly. But the silence of her confidence was louder than any scream I had ever heard. I felt a rage and helplessness I had never experienced. Every muscle in my body wanted to react, to fight, to throw those papers across the room, to demand that she leave. But I also knew that if I lost control, I would lose the very thing I was fighting for. I forced myself to sit, to breathe, to study the documents and understand the depth of her plan. It was worse than I had imagined. She had thought through every step, every potential obstacle, every way to corner me into submission. As the hours passed, I realized something chilling. She wasn't just trying to take the house. She was trying to strip me of my confidence, my autonomy, my ability to even think clearly. Each subtle comment she made, each suggestion that I might not be capable, was designed to erode me. I felt like I was unraveling, caught in a trap so well laid that even my own grief seemed to become a weapon against me. But amid the fear, determination flared. I remembered why I had started documenting everything, why I had reached it out to friends and lawyers, why I had refused to give in to panic. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was protecting the memory of my husband, the life we had shared, and the dignity that she seemed determined to crush. The fight had become larger than the physical space. It was about standing up, proving that grief and loss don't make a person powerless. The tension reached a breaking point one evening when I discovered her latest maneuver. A series of letters and notes, carefully hidden, revealed that she had enlisted someone to manipulate neighbors and friends against me, to turn my world upside down while I tried to grieve. I felt my hands shake, my stomach knot, and a hot wave of anger rolled through me. She had been orchestrating this behind the scenes, using silence, strategy, and fear as her weapons. I knew I had to act fast. Every day I hesitated. The danger grew. I reviewed every document, every note, every interaction. I rehearsed conversations, prepared evidence, and built a strategy. The fear was there, constant, gnawing at me, but it had been joined by something stronger: resolve. I realized that if I could stand firm, I could reclaim not just the house, but my life, my autonomy, and my dignity. The days blurred into weeks. I barely slept, barely ate, living in a heightened state of alert, each sound or shadow setting my heart racing. I could feel her presence everywhere, in letters, in phone calls, even in casual conversations that seemed loaded with hidden meaning. And yet, in that tension, I discovered clarity. The fear that had once immobilized me became fuel, sharpening my focus, teaching me to anticipate her moves and to resist in ways I never thought possible. And then, one evening, I discovered the ultimate revelation of her plan. A truth so shocking and personal that it made me pause and gasp. It wasn't just about a house, or even the control of property. It was about erasing my husband's memory, undermining my very existence, and asserting dom in ants in ways I had never imagined. My hands shook as I held the evidence, my chest heavy with a mix of horror and determination. I realized that the next move would define everything. This confrontation would decide whether I would remain a victim or rise to reclaim my life. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of the storm and the possibility of facing it head-on. Fear, anger, sadness, and resolve intertwined, creating a cocktail of emotion that left me both terrified and unstoppable. The battle was far from over. In fact, the hardest part was just beginning. And I knew, deep down, that once I confronted the truth fully, nothing would ever be the same again. Would I have the strength to face her? Could I protect everything that mattered while standing against someone so relentless, so meticulously cruel? I didn't know yet. But I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I could no longer wait, and the next step I took would determine the fate of my home, my memories, and my life. It all came to a head one grey afternoon, the kind of day where the sky feels heavy and the air presses down on your chest. I had spent the morning going over every document, every note, every letter she had left behind. My hands shook, not just from fear, but from anticipation. I knew this confrontation wouldn't be like the others. I could feel it in every nerve of my body. Something had shifted. Her calm, calculated approach was about to collide with my growing resolve. I opened the door to the living room and froze. My mother-in-law was there, standing near the table, her posture calm, almost regal, with a stack of papers in her hands. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then placed the documents down as if she owned every inch of the room. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't just about letters or legal claims anymore. This was about control, power, and the way she seemed intent on proving that grief could be exploited. "You see, Alec," she said softly, her tone chilling in its calmness. "Everything I'm doing is within my rights." Her words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made the air between us thick, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers across the room, to confront her directly. But I forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to let the adrenaline sharpen my mind instead of cloud it. I began to carefully examine the documents, the extent of her planning now fully laid bare. She had orchestrated everything months in advance: legal maneuvers, manipulations of neighbors, subtle threats disguised as polite requests. My chest tightened as I realized the depth of her cruelty. This wasn't a moment of opportunism. It was a meticulously executed plan, and I had been caught in the middle while still grieving the love of my life. The hours stretched on. She watched me silently, occasionally making small, pointed comments that reminded me of how precarious my position had become. Each word, each glance, each subtle movement was designed to unnerve me, to assert dominance. I could feel my fear rising, twisting in my stomach, but I also felt something else, a growing, fiery determination that I hadn't known I possessed. I wouldn't let her win. Not now. Not ever. Then, in a quiet, almost casual moment, I noticed a subtle inconsistency in her documents, something that revealed the vulnerability in her otherwise flawless plan. My heart leapt, not from relief, but from the sudden awareness that the tide could turn if I acted carefully. I began to strategize in my mind, thinking through each step, each potential reaction, and how I could leverage this against her. It was terrifying, but it was also empowering. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every second felt stretched, each moment a test of my resolve. I could feel her watching me, waiting for a sign of weakness, a flicker of fear that would give her the upper hand. And yet, I refused to give her that satisfaction. I reminded myself of my husband, of our life together, and of everything I was fighting to protect. I had to stand firm, even if it felt like the walls were closing in. Suddenly, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't understand, Alec. This isn't personal. It's about what's mine." Her words hit me like a punch, and for a moment, I felt completely powerless. But then the evidence I had gathered, the documentation of every intrusion and threat, flashed in my mind. I realized that I had power too. Power she had underestimated. I spoke, my voice trembling but growing steadier with each word. I outlined the evidence, the manipulations, the threats. I made it clear that I knew the truth, that I had the proof, and that I would not back down. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. She had always believed that I was fragile, that grief would keep me compliant, that fear would silence me. But she had miscalculated. The room felt charged, almost electric, as the two forces collided. Her calculated control and my rising determination. Every moment was taut with suspense, every glance a challenge. And then, the unexpected happened. She made a move. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to reveal her next plan. My stomach dropped, but I was ready. I counted mentally, anticipating her every step, refusing to be caught off guard again. By the end of that day, I had gained a measure of control. I couldn't yet declare victory, far from it, but I had proven something crucial. I could stand up to her, I could fight, and I could protect my home and my memories. The storm wasn't over, but the fear that had once consumed me had transformed into determination, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of agency. I knew the final confrontation was still to come, and that it would demand everything from me. But I also knew that I wasn't the same person who had sat frozen in fear weeks ago. I had faced the darkest part of her plan and survived. The next steps would be decisive, and the battle to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my home had reached a turning point. Would I finally triumph, or was there more darkness yet to come? I didn't know, but I understood this clearly. The fight for justice, for truth, and for what is right had only just begun, and I was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The days after that confrontation were surreal. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion, relief, and lingering fear. My mother-in-law's confidence had faltered that day, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her plan. It wasn't over, not entirely, but I finally had the upper hand. I had documented everything, gathered evidence, and prepared for the legal steps that would protect what was rightfully mine. But beyond the paperwork and the strategy, something deeper shifted. I felt myself reclaiming the part of me that grief and fear had tried to bury. It wasn't immediate. Each morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, expecting another intrusion, another confrontation. But slowly, the tension began to ease. The house, once a battlefield, started to feel like home again. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, remembering my husband and the life we had built. The memories didn't feel stolen anymore. They felt mine, untouchable, a fortress no one could breach. I thought about the pain, the helplessness, and the fear I had endured. It was overwhelming to realize that someone I had trusted could plan so meticulously to strip me of my life, my memories, and my sense of security. But I also realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about countless others who face manipulation, control, and injustice in silence, especially in moments of vulnerability. I had been fortunate to find my strength, but how many others never get that chance? How many lives are quietly eroded while the world looks away? Then now, I feel a shadow of that fear, a reminder of the storm I survived. But it is tempered by resilience. I learned that courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means moving forward despite it. I discovered that standing up for yourself, even when the odds are stacked, is the only way to reclaim what is yours. And I discovered that grief, though heavy and consuming, can coexist with determination, with hope, with the fight to protect what matters. In the end, I didn't just reclaim a house. I reclaimed my life. I reclaimed my sense of self, my dignity, and my ability to trust my instincts. I realized that the battles we face, whether against personal betrayal, societal injustice, or subtle manipulation, shape us in ways we cannot always see in the moment. And they remind us that courage is a choice, not a circumstance. So I ask you, watching this now, how often do we let fear or silence allow injustice to continue? How many lives, homes, and dreams are quietly eroded because people stay passive? My story isn't unique. It is part of a much larger truth. Injustice thrives when people remain silent. Courage and action can ripple far beyond a single home, a single life. I survived. I fought. I reclaimed what was mine. But what about those who can't? The question remains, will we act when the world demands it, or will we let fear dictate our silence? And as I sit here, finally able to breathe fully again, I know one thing for certain. Grief may have brought me to my knees, but courage, determination, and the refusal to give up lifted me back up. And if my story teaches anything, let it be this. Never underestimate the strength you have, even in your darkest hour, even when everything seems lost, even when betrayal cuts deep, you are capable of standing, fighting, and reclaiming your life.